And we're going to go and find his lexical entry, which is right here. And I find it to be quite good, actually. This is what Schnabel devised as a formal lexical entry for the word Baptizein and also Baptine. So, first of all, physical uses. And this is the first section, physical uses. And then he goes down lower to 2 figurative uses. And then he goes to a second definition and a third definition, depending on the usage. So up here, under the first usage of physical uses, he says to put into a yielding substance, such as a liquid, as an example, water or dyes or the body of an animal. And I would add, if I were going to do this, I would say to put a yielding substance onto an object. I would add that. Schnabel goes on and says, for glosses, to plunge, to dip, to immerse. And I would add to drench, to overwhelm. And we've seen that in some of the other lexical entries as well, to drench, to overwhelm. So that's what I would add right here, which is not a big deal, but it is, I think, important to get the full range of meaning. Any case, the first extended sense of this initial definition is to cleanse with water, to wash. So after to plunge, to dip, to immerse, you get to the meaning of to wash. In other words, Greek users in the first century understood baptizo in a lot of different ways. The first one could have been just immersion and inert immersion, to immerse inertly, but then it also could carry the idea of to wash, which Schnabel says an extended meaning of one, to remove dirt by immersion in water. I don't think you can prove that people were thinking in terms of, that it means wash by immersion in water. I think they just used it as a synonym for wash, for luo, for wash. I think it eventually became a synonym. It might have originally been used with the idea of immersion, but I don't think you can prove that it only means by immersion, which you see in lo nida, which we saw in lo nida earlier, which might have been by immersion. But in any case, Schnabel believes that it's by immersion. So then the next extended sense, 1b, which I think is the most important for the New Testament, is to make ceremonially clean, and then the gloss, to purify or to cleanse, which Schnabel says an extended meaning of one, to immerse in water, symbolizing or effecting the removal of moral or spiritual defilement. Again, maybe immerse, but I don't think that it's only stuck on the idea of immerse. I think it eventually extended to include various ideas in whatever way. It could include immerse, but it might include drenching, pouring out, which we read about in Acts chapter 2, where the Spirit is poured out. We're going to think about that a little later, but in any case, what it does do is symbolizing or effecting the removal of moral or spiritual defilement. Schnabel says of later ecclesiastical language, to baptize. So in other words, it was transliterated. The next definition, extended definition that he lists, is not found in the New Testament, but it's found in other writings. To take water or wine by dipping a drinking vessel in a stream, in a fountain, in a well, or a bowl. To draw water. 1d is yet another extended sense, and we don't find this extended sense in the New Testament, but we do find it in Josephus, actually quite often. To perish by submersion in water, to drown to suffer death by suffocation, being immersed in water of persons, or to disappear by submersion in water. How about to sink, which he does list here? How about leaving off all this extra wordage and just say to sink? So it could mean to drown or to sink. Those are the extended senses in English. And then there's another kind of rare sense. There's another kind of rare sense in which it was used to describe the slaughter, to slaughter or to kill, to plunge a knife into the body of an animal or a human being. There's one example in Josephus, and I think there's another example in Chrysostom, if I'm not mistaken, where he uses it in a similar way. Then we get to another important extended sense. This is actually of bapto, not of baptizo. Bapto is a related word. Actually, it's the original word. And baptizo was developed from bapto. At least that's what I've read. Most scholars of ancient Greek believe that bapto was first, and then baptizo was a development of bapto. And bapto itself, to dip, eventually acquired an additional meaning to tinge fabric with a color, to dye. And it's not just fabric. Both Philos of Alexandria and Josephus, they use it to dye someone's hair. For example, Herod in Josephus talks about dyeing his hair, and he used bapto. So that's only for bapto, not for baptizo. So that's a particular usage that separates bapto from baptizo, or baptine from baptizein. When we get to figurative uses, we see a great expansion of the meaning of baptizo. And I'll just comment here that if the word is carrying figurative usages, then it becomes real easy to imagine that creative people would use it in physical situations where it carried an abstract effect. And that is something that I think not enough people are really thinking about when they try to define the idea of baptizing in the New Testament. There should be a complementary idea that an action is occurring one way or the other, whether it's by immersion or by some other action that causes an effect. Which of the two ideas is brought into the forefront? For example, is it mostly the action, the form of the action, or is it the result of the action? Is it the form of the activity, or is it the result of the activity? That's the question I believe is the most important when we're talking about the word baptizo in the New Testament. But when you talk about, we can talk about being overwhelmed, and this particular meaning is found in the Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures called the Septuagint, and we are definitely going to look at that particular usage. It's in Isaiah chapter 21, verse 4. The New English translation of the Septuagint renders that usage of baptizo with overwhelmed. The third main definition that Schnabel lists in this formal lexicon is to become intoxicated, to be drunk. This is important, and I believe I'm going to show what I believe to be the case, that when Yeshua, Jesus, talked to James and John about sitting at his right or left hand, he asked them, "Can you drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized?" Drinking the cup and becoming drunk in a detrimental way it's found in the prophecies of the Hebrew Bible, and it's also found in the book of Revelation. Drinking a cup and getting extremely intoxicated was bad. It was a bad thing. And it's my conclusion that Mark, when he wrote that passage there in Mark chapter 10, verses 38, 39, he was translating a Jewish terminology from the Hebrew Bible into Greek, using drink the cup and be drunk with the drunkenness with which I am drunken. And he used the word baptizo and baptisma. That is going to be, for many people, that is going to be an astounding idea to think about, and I think it's correct. And actually, I had a paper published on that, which we can look at later.